into the city. Today you can walk right down that water shaft, as my wife is doing here, and if you travel over there, this is one of the things you want to do, just like Joab did. The water comes from the Gihon Springs, which is of course mentioned numerous times in the Bible. It provides water for the city of Jerusalem, one of the few sources of water in Israel, and it's a very prolific spring. Mentioned in 2 Chronicles 32, it was Hezekiah who stopped the upper outlet of the waters of the Gihon and directed it to the west side of the city. They, of course, now occupy the city, and here comes Sennacherib ready to attack the city, the Assyrian king. And, okay, maybe they're going to come up the water shaft like Joab did, so we've got to protect this. And he did so with an outer wall, and by redirecting the water back to the western side of the city. Well, you look there at the spring and you can see the shaft that was cut where it's pointed toward the west side of the city, and we'll see where that shaft goes in just a moment. But there at Gihon, there was a tower that was surrounding it that formed a large area where Solomon was coronated. And we look to 1 Kings chapter 1. The king said, this is King David, "Take with you the servants of the Lord, have my son Solomon ride on my own mule and bring him down to Gihon, where the springs are. Let Zadok the priest, Nathan the prophet anoint him. They blow the trumpet. Here's a big ceremony they're going to have. And it would be in this restored area, in the center of this area pointed to by the arrow. That's where the spring is, and these towers were built around it to protect the spring. Well, they're not really towers. There's really just one tower, we have found out now since this picture was drawn. Where is this area where the coronation took place? There was a little room about 8 by 12 that the archaeologists said this is all it could be. David Alid is one of the archaeologists who's working there with us in the city of David, was listening to one of the tour guides say this and thinking about what he read in Scripture. There were mules in here. There was the prophets. There was a big ceremony. In this little room, this just doesn't make any sense. And he just kind of went berserk, they thought. Grabbed up a sledgehammer and started beating on a wall. He says there has to be more than this. And the wall was actually built, that he was beating on, by Queen Helena some 300 years after Christ. She's the mother of Constantine that made a lot of messes over there. He broke the wall down, and it opened up into this huge area, not quite as big as this auditorium, but close. Certainly room for several mules in the ceremony that they're talking about, as would be reflected in the area that you're looking at here. That's inside that area, there at the spring of Gihon. Water was also stored from the spring at a pool that we have determined dates back to the time of Melchizedek. But at the time Sennacherib came, they decided to fill it in, because this was to protect the water from anyone who would be coming, and that's militarily significant. We were involved in helping to excavate that pool, which had been filled in by King Hezekiah, and you see all kinds of pottery and artifacts, idols, from the time of Hezekiah. And at this point we see my son in the center, and then a broken idol that he found at the excavation there. There's several of them have been. Every one of the idols that have been found were broken. Many of the jars are intact, many of the oil lamps are intact, but all of the idols are. Well, Hezekiah didn't get along well with the idolaters, did he? He helped destroy, break down the idols, and he broke the idols before he piled them into the pool. This is the south end of a northbound calf, which they typically worshipped. The text says he diverted the water to the west side of the city, and we saw the little outlet there from the spring that headed to the west side. Again, 2 Chronicles 32, he stopped the waters of Gihon, directed them to the west side, and made the pool and the conduit, brought the water into the city. This is a diagram of what we're looking at. Here's the Gihon spring there in red, and the dark blue line is the tunnel that Hezekiah dug to redirect the water from the original course indicated by the light blue line, which he then protected by an outer wall, as we'll see. But The water then went down this dark blue line. It was through a tunnel that he dug. Well, you can walk down those tunnels that are described in Scripture as being built by Hezekiah. And there's an inscription that was found several years ago that described how the tunnel was built. This is a picture of it. It describes beginning from either end, and as they approached, they could hear each other, and they finally met as axe was against axe. It gives the length of the tunnel. It's there, just like the Scriptures would indicate, and as confirmed by the inscription. That tunnel continued down to the pool of Siloam, the text says in Scripture. Well, here's this little bitty pool that the tunnel goes to. Now, that was a puzzle, because the pool of Siloam ought to be more significant than this, and it's just a little dinky thing that you can see here in this picture that the tunnel does go to, and the Scripture says, okay, it goes to the tunnel, but this is not much of a pool. And actually, what's built around it is Byzantine. It's not really that old. What we found was that that's not the pool of Siloam. This blue, light blue area lower is a much larger pool. It's well over an acre that we found in 2004. But wait a minute, the tunnel doesn't go down to the big pool. Well, yes, it does. We found out last summer, as we helped excavate. The tunnel just kept right on going past that little bitty dinky thing that they've been saying is the pool of Siloam for years, to the big pool. Let's go back up to the Gihon Springs, where there were towers built around to provide it. And that tower, I think, is referred to in Scripture in Luke chapter 13, but it's pointed to here by the arrow. And remember, Jesus said, do you suppose these 18 on whom the tower fell and killed were worse culprits than all the men in it? 18 people were killed here. And sure enough, we found where that tower had fallen, and these huge stones that were probably laid there by the Jebusites had fallen, and that was what had been protecting. This is where 18 people were killed, and actually we got a 19th. No, that's actually my son here posing as one of the 19th. He found the vertebrae here of a donkey right next to the tower as we were excavating, and came up with the theory that maybe the donkey kicked the tower over. I don't think so, but we're enjoying ourselves as we're excavating in this area. The wall of Hezekiah is a very impressive find found by Eli Sucron. Again, back in 2 Chronicles 32, Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come, intended to make war on Jerusalem. He took courage, rebuilt all the wall that had been broken down, erected towers on it, and built another outside wall. So in addition to redirecting the water to the west side, he built an outside wall that we see here, protecting what Joab had climbed up through. And here it is. Kenyon referred to this specifically, said it didn't exist. There's no wall. If there was a wall, I would have found it. Well, if she had been if she'd been looking for it, I think she'd have found it. Obvious. I mean, this is hard to miss. This is huge. But when you're not looking for it and don't believe it's there, then it's easy to miss. And she did, but it's obviously there, just as described in Scripture. On the west side, the far extremity, there's a description of the wall that was built when Nehemiah was rebuilding the walls. In chapter 2, verse 17, he rebuilt the wall of Jerusalem. Verse 8 of chapter 3 says they restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. This is as far as in the western direction goes. Well, you go to the western side and you look at the wall, and there it is, and it's 23 feet across. That's the broadest part of that rebuilt wall, and that's exactly the way it's described. The tombs of the house of David were one of the things Kenyon referred to, and said there's no reference to the tomb. In 1 Kings 2 says that David slept with his fathers, was buried. Well, if you find some of the tombs of the prophets, and there's several there, you ought to certainly find where David was buried. Well, we did. It was difficult because Queen Helena had made this her quarry, and I think it was a beautiful edifice initially, several indications of that, But you see where the square areas are. She's quarrying stones here to build her buildings, and had destroyed this, but even the liberals now acknowledge, yes, this is David's and Solomon's tombs, and they were probably beautiful before Queen Helena destroyed them. The walls that surrounded the temple, a few portions of that do remain. Remember, of course, the story of the Romans